if AI, is solving all the problems in the world that they need more intelligence, right? Blockchains try to solve the problems in the world that need more coordination. Today, we don't really have a global payment system or global financial system. So think of sort of stablecoins and blockchains as an over-the-top network. It's from day one global payment system that just sort of works everywhere. That's kind of the simple way to think of it. Blockchains are fundamentally social technologies.
Can you give us a temperature on the crypto markets? It's been up and
Come
down.
on, let them take a victory lap. Let them take a victory lap.
I feel like you get.
I mean, I know the job's not finished, but
they always twist your arm into doing podcasts when the market's down and saying, "Oh, you got to hold you accountable." And then where is Kara Swisher calling you when the market's up?
That's a good point. That's a good point. I mean, it's been a long journey, as you guys pointed out. I think that, we had a lot of challenges the last 4 years, regulatory challenges with the last administration, and that looks like it's trending much better now with the new administration. It's sort of more pro-tech, and I think we have a lot of momentum in Congress, and that's a big deal because that created a lot of headwinds. So that's great. And then also like the kind of core infrastructure, and I don't know if you guys want to talk more about it, but totally. So for example, one of the things happening right now are stablecoins are really taking off. So like last month, it was something like 2 trillion in stablecoin volume, which is more than trillion with a T, which is more than Visa. And so, quite a lot of volume. And a lot of that's due to the fact that the infrastructure, so Solana, Ethereum, and so forth, has gotten really good.
Yeah.
So you can now send an arbitrary amount of money anywhere in the world for under 1 penny in 1 second. But that took years and years of work, investment, founders, technical folks doing a lot of work. So that's great. And so there's a lot of good things. I think that, there's a lot of challenges too, but overall it's been fun.
Do you think that the narrative around stablecoins is still going to morph into micropayments?
Briefly, the way to think about stablecoins is today we don't really have a global payment system or global financial system. We have 195 countries. Each one has many different banking systems. When you send money to another country, like I say, you wire money. Like actually, we've had this experience at the firm where we wire investment, and it ends up going through like a bunch of humans and paperwork. It's really just a mishmash of systems. And so the way to think about stablecoins is similar to how, for those who are old enough to remember, text messaging was like this like in the 2000s. You would send a text message and you would say, you don't have a plan to send to Canada, you got to sign up. And it was all these different systems. And then WhatsApp and FaceTime came along and they built this sort of what they call over-the-top global network, right? So think of sort of stablecoins and blockchains as an over-the-top network. It's from day one, global, low fee, credibly neutral, programmable, payment system that just sort of works everywhere. That's kind of the simple way to think of it. And so as you mentioned, one of the obvious benefits is just cross-border, and that's where a lot of the uses are right now. And so, for example, like SpaceX has a program where they move, they'll sell a Starlink in, I think it's like some south of like Brazil or something, and then they'll immediately, use stablecoins for so-called treasury management. Yep. This is one of the kind of growing use cases that folks like Stripe will talk about. Remittances, you're sending money back home, from the U.S. to whatever, some developing country, countries where the currency is volatile and they want access to dollars or euros. And then, as you mentioned, John, the idea that and actually, I encourage those who are interested to go listen to the Collisons. They were an All-In podcast a few weeks ago talking about this. What they're actually say they're really excited about is less the low fees and more the programmability, as you just described. And so you can so this is like one obvious thing is, invoice fraud. So people will send, these faxes type things. That's really old fashioned, where they'll say like, here's my wiring instruction. I know if you've done this, you'll say like, please make sure you call first. But of course, calling doesn't work in an age of AI because it could be a fake voice. And so, what Stripe was excited about is that because blockchains are programmable, they can have a full kind of reputation system on top. So they know like this is a valid place to send money to for your invoicing system, right? So you can program it. As you mentioned, micropayments, right? Now that you can send money for 1 penny, that unlocks a whole bunch of use cases. So machine-to-machine payments, every time you're doing an AI API request, so as you mentioned, MCP, right? So like why should MCP, I would expect, would have down the road a payment standard, right? And AI agents. So you imagine a world, which I think we're headed to pretty soon in a couple of years, we have all these different AI agents running around. I'm advertising, I can program, I can write your essay for you, I can, do your homework, whatever. And they're all sort of advertising their services. And then you sort of imagine other agents coming along and negotiating and pennies getting transferred back and forth, and this big kind of, economic, kind of mishmash, like kind of collection, on top. So the web moves from like these kind of sign up forms to agents sending money automatically. And we think that would be most naturally powered by a global, low fee programmable system like blockchains.
We went from a large coalition of people trying to basically, block crypto from getting real adoption and traction in the US to suddenly ETFs being approved and things like that. And I imagine that's kind of changed your guys' strategy on the Hill. So I'm interested to hear how that's evolved.
In Washington, they like to say, if you are not at the table, you're on the menu. Yeah. So you don't want to be on the menu. So I've been going sort of like once a month, and Mark has too, and really just kind of trying to explain our perspective, because we feel like the interests of most startups don't have the resources to go to DC, right? And of course, big tech companies do, and big banks do, and all sorts of other big entities do. And so our kind of logic was that we're one of the few kind of organizations that has enough scale to have a government affairs team who represents the interest of startups. And so we go and we say, look, we represent small companies, and here's what they're interested in. So for example, they want to have clear guardrails and rules around blockchains. They want to have open source AI. That's another really important issue to us. Mm-hmm. Clear rules on like AI and copyright. There's a series of things. Having a single federal framework and not a 50 state laws on a lot of these things and so forth, right? And so we go and we kind of advocate for that. We've taken a bipartisan approach from the beginning. We think that's very important. I mean, look, just one is we think the way you really build industries is legislation. If you think back to the internet, that was built on the 96 Telecom Act. So we've always felt that both for AI and for crypto, we want legislation that provides clear rules, paths for innovation, and really eliminates or mitigates or eliminates, all the kind of bad use cases and bad actors. And so that's always been our approach. It's been bipartisan. That's for legislation, you need bipartisan, first of all. And secondly, like the Democratic Party has, like most people will sort of think, Republicans are pro-crypto, Democrats are anti. That's not really true.
I looked at the donation dollars that were coming from crypto-aligned people and crypto funds, and it was split almost exactly 50-50. Like the entire crypto community really did go super bipartisan with the spend. How do you think about the adoption across government, B2B, or just direct to consumer? What are the key drivers for the different constituencies and then the different applications, and how do they fit together?
No, that's a great question. And I have a broader kind of framework I like to talk about, which is sort of, I sort of like to distinguish technologies between what I call inside out and outside in. And so inside out are things that sort of start with established institutions, like AI to some extent is like that. The iPhone was like this. It came out of Apple, a very established institution. AI came out of, Stanford and so forth. Whereas crypto very much, Bitcoin started at the fringes, right? And so, sort of like open source software and there's, other kind of tech movements that started at the fringes, and it sort of worked its way in, right? So stablecoin started for the main use case was settling, crypto trades, 7 years ago or something. And then over time, you started to see more and more like, payment providers in Argentina, for example, and that, sort of more kind of moving to the center. Now Stripe, I think of Stripe is very much probably the smartest, a lot of people think the smartest, one of the, if not the smartest fintech company is all in on it. They did a $1 billion acquisition, a bridge. To get, to ramp up their efforts. I think the main gating factor, like I speak to a lot of like what I would love to see is a world where you have banks and, asset management firms and every payment provider, as you described, John, like behind the scenes, it's just sort of, it's the substrate, it's the infrastructure, right? It's like HTTP or SMTP. It's just this thing that exists. A lot of them say we just want like that final, regulatory clarity piece, right? Because they want that assurance, because they're risk averse. We just had 4 years of kind of lawfare against the industry. So that's why I think that's really like, honestly, like I probably spend more than half my time on that now. Like that's just kind of the key. There's two big kind of bills that we're advocating for. There's stablecoins. There's one called market structure that's just coming forward in the House now, which is also to kind of clarify more broadly on tokens. But I think that's the main thing right now. I think, but to your point, exactly, I don't think most people ultimately will think of even the word stablecoin. I think it'll be like digital dollars. That like for the average person.
Yeah, right? It'll be an industry term like ERP. People interface with that, but they don't know.
We'll see. Like we have a fintech group at the firm that's not crypto. Folks like I think you interviewed Anish and all those folks. And they like crypto, but they're not like crypto. And they'll tell me now like it's become pretty standard in the fintech stack that people will use stablecoins.
Yeah. So let's.
Yeah, you're like a 3-person startup, and like boom, you push a button and you got 190 countries. That's very different than the old days. Sorry,
that's crazy. I want to get your point of view on the competitive forces and dynamics right now, because we have startups, which there's entire subcategories. You have hyper decentralized, crypto companies. You have sort of hybrid companies like maybe Bridge that are kind of sitting in between fintech and crypto rails. And then you now have big institutional players that are coming in. Maybe they brought ETFs to market to start, and then now they're thinking about stablecoin applications as well. How do you look at the market, and what kind of advice do you give to portfolio companies that are trying to figure out who they are, whether that's fully decentralized or some type of hybrid?
The point is not for like decentralization and kind of this new architecture of blockchains for its own sake. The point is they have specific benefits. So like why would one build on a blockchain like Ethereum or Solana as opposed to a traditional, on AWS, like a traditional architecture? And the answer is when you build, the way I like to describe it most simply is blockchains allow you to build digital services that remove the intermediaries. So for example, stablecoins, you have no intermediaries that are taking fees. You don't have the banks and the payment providers and the payment networks, right, that take all the different layers of fees. So that's an important benefit is you're building these, you could build social networks without fees. You can build games without fees. You can build AI systems without fees, right? Without fees, it's like very low, like a couple basis points. I actually have it, if for those interested, I wrote a book, Read, Write, Own, and I have a chapter on take rates where I go through this in detail. But it's essentially you going from like 30% in the App Store, 100% in Facebook and 50% on YouTube to like 5 basis points or something, right? So, or 2.5% for payments and so forth. So the first question is why would you want to build on them? The other one we mentioned before is programmability. You can do all sorts of cool stuff on top. And so I think to your question, I think it depends. Like ultimately, I think of startups as you want to work backwards. You want to say, what do you want to do for the world? What kind of service do you want to provide? And then you work backwards and you say, how do you want to build that? All right. And in some cases, that means you want to build something on a blockchain, like a pure service, like a protocol, we call it, with a token and so forth. In other cases, you want to build more traditional software that may be like, for example, like you mentioned, that bridges between a bank and an asset manager and a blockchain system, right? So I think ultimately we think of it through that lens as kind of, now as an investor, I skew towards things, I like things with, for example, network effects, because it's just, they can be in my career, I've found that network effects can be very powerful, right? You invest in something, it grows, it kind of has a natural kind of defensibility and kind of gets better as more people use it. So there's just kind of different lenses you can look at it. The last thing I would say is, to your listeners, I know you have a broad audience. I think that the crypto space right now, the real shortage we have is startup talent. In that there's a lot of obvious good ideas where there just aren't many people pursuing it. So I think it's actually the opposite problem than you might have an AI right now, where I imagine an AI, it's an amazing technology and deservingly people are excited, as they should be excited about it. But you probably for every idea have, 50 good startups pursuing it. In crypto, I think we're undercompeted. Like we have too little competition, honestly. So I would just say to your listeners, if you're a smart person thinking about doing a startup, I think there's a lot of white space right now. I think blockchains, I think we no longer have the infrastructure as an excuse anymore. Like now it's about building applications, about getting regulatory clarity. And I think we're pretty far along there. I think we have a long way to go fully exploring kind of the idea maze and all the different cool things you can do, and then bringing it to billions of people is the goal.
What kind of general guidance are you giving to somebody that maybe was an active trader and wants to get more into the actual, kind of venture side of the game?
I've been investing in venture funds and crypto funds for a long time. Just sort of after I sold my first company. In fact, Mark Andreessen and I had done it together for a long time. And I think it's just traditional finance in the sense of you have to, non-consensus right? Like as much as we hear about crypto, it's still very non-consensus. A lot of venture funds just simply, maybe they'll have a little bit of Bitcoin, but they'll rule it out if there's tokens and things. You talk to fund of funds, a lot of them will say we have the no crypto rule, sovereign wealth funds, so all the kind of giant pools of capital that fund the venture world. And so it's still kind of considered this kind of weird sideshow. Like obviously the past doesn't predict the future and so forth, and we don't know how things will play out, but it's still very non-consensus, I think, from a financial investing point of view, the broader crypto world. So I believe that's where the opportunities are in venture investing. Obviously you have to also be right, and time will tell. but I think it's still much more it's surprisingly non-consensus in the investing world.
Can you explain a little bit of the dynamic of how venture fits into the life cycle of a new crypto company these days?
What we believe very strongly is alignment between the investors and the founders. And so there's sort of this equity structure with token rights or token warrants is one where if they decide they can stay an equity company and they can do, just do traditional kind of go for profits and things, or they can create a token or they can create 2 tokens or whatever is best for that service they're trying to create. And in whatever way that they eventually decide to, whatever business model they pursue, the investor will participate kind of pro rata alongside the founders.
What happens to the C Corp in that scenario where they launch a token, the token grows, and the community is, and like the asset is now controlled by the token, and the C Corp still exists? Are there roles for foundations and nonprofits and different transitions that could happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. A lot of times they'll just become like kind of one software provider in the network.
Oh, sure.
Right? Like,
makes sense.
So for example, think of the Ethereum Foundation. I don't know if you guys know the relationship between Ethereum Foundation and Ethereum. Ethereum is a network.
Yeah.
Ethereum Foundation, they help make a little bit of software. They give some research guidance, but they don't control the network. They don't.
That makes sense.
It's like kind of in the same way there's just sort of a foundation that has some kind of a bully pulpit. Sometimes they can have a separate business model. So like Uniswap is a decentralized protocol that we're investors in. That's sort of think of it as a decentralized New York Stock Exchange or something that's doing very well, multiple trillions in volume traded. And they spun off this protocol, and then they separately have a website that they operate, which is what the company does. And the website is now, I believe it's sub 5% of the volume on the protocol, but it's still 5%, right? And so they're just one front end to it. And so I think that's probably maybe one of the best examples of what you're asking, John.
That makes a ton of sense. Jordy?
What are you expecting to see out of the kind of real world asset category over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think of stablecoins as sort of the initial real world asset, right? So you have dollars in the bank account, and then the great thing about that, the kind of adoption there, and hopefully all the regulatory clarity we're getting, is that will be a natural stepping stone to, you have Robinhood talking about stocks, you have BlackRock talking about treasury bills. I think it would be nice if anyone in the world, I think it'd be good for the U.S. and I think it'd be good for the world if anyone in the world could buy 4.5%. Treasury, interest treasury bill, right?
Yeah, totally.
And have it secure and easy and permissionless and low fee. I think it's good for our, the U.S., the popularity of the dollar. And I think it's, it'd be nice for somebody who has a volatile currency to have access to those. Stocks, bonds, and then you can imagine, all of these sorts of so-called dark pools. So, still a large part of finance is people using Bloomberg and calling each other. And a lot of that, like trading bonds and muni bonds and corporate bonds and things like that. There's a lot of interest from the banks to think about ways to use blockchains to create essentially marketplaces there, maybe permissioned marketplaces where only kind of certain participants can participate. For them, the benefit is, why haven't they created a network like a marketplace before? Because they don't trust each other. They don't want, like, who's going to create it? Is Goldman going to create it and JP Morgan's going to use it? They don't trust each other. They don't trust startups to do it, because then the startup will start taking the big fees. They've just sort of kept it informal and by phone. And so in a way, a blockchain kind of solves a political problem of getting these 20 entities or 100 entities who previously wouldn't kind of coordinate together. I think that's one broader way to think of blockchains, is like, it's like if AI, is solving all the problems in the world that they need more intelligence, right? Blockchains try to solve the problems in the world that need more coordination, right? Or more, kind of collective action, getting a bunch of, blockchains are fundamentally social technologies, and it's about getting a bunch of, that's what money is ultimately social, right? It's getting a lot of people to agree on a standard and to use the same systems and tools. And so similarly with real world assets like that. And there's other interesting ones to your question, like we have one called Story Protocol, a project we're investors in, that's putting intellectual property on blockchains and letting people, do capital formation and licensing and so forth.
How would you like to see the industry and kind of the world collectively try to solve social engineering hacks? Feels like WorldCoin is one potential solution there, but I imagine there's a bunch of other sort of businesses that you could fund, and then a whole regulatory piece as well, which is we sort of force these large companies now.
Yeah, you mentioned WorldCoin. I'll just say briefly. So what WorldCoin does is what we call proof of humanity. So it's a way for you to get a cryptographic key that proves you're human. And the idea is in a world, as we're moving too quickly with AI bots and deepfakes and so forth, it's useful to be able to say, hey, I'm truly a human. And, I can imagine a blue check on Twitter that actually cryptographically means you're human and not just that you paid $10. We think that would be useful. It's sort of a missing, kind of building block, so to speak, for the internet that I think we all want. And so one thing we think about is like, what are those missing building blocks? You mentioned zero knowledge proofs. Zero knowledge proofs are, I think, a really interesting cryptographic breakthrough that I think people underestimate in the broader world how important they are. What they let you do is essentially prove things. So I can prove, like a bank needs to know I'm a U.S. citizen, let's say, or I'm, have a certain income or certain profile of, health data or so forth. What zero knowledge proofs let you do is I can prove that to the system without revealing any of that, like my actual, where it can basically send me a cryptographic kind of a game that says prove that you're a U.S. citizen, and I can prove it back without revealing all my name and all the other kind of stuff that might dox me, right? I mean, we just saw like day after day we see these giant hacks, KYC hacks, so forth. Like at this point, you should just assume all of your information that sadly has been hacked many times. And having Social Security as like your unique ID and password is just like a ridiculous system in this era. Right? So
yeah.
And meanwhile, we have these, we carry around these supercomputers with biometrics and advanced cryptography. Like, why aren't we using it? Right. The problem is not the tech, the core tech. The problem is coordination again. Like, it's how do you get everyone to agree on what the standards are, right? And that's why I think blockchains can be important, because it's really all the pieces are there, but how do you kind of put them all together in a broad kind of standard or coordinated system?
Amazing.
That's great.
Thank you so much for coming on.
We'd love to continue for
we could go way
hour.
longer. We need to have you back.
Awesome, guys.
Talk more.
Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
It's great to see somebody, a contrarian idea that a tech show that actually likes tech.
What a concept.
We're very bullish on it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon,
Thanks for coming on, Chris. Have a good one.
Bye.